This is Your Other Brothers Podcast.
Fear, you're not my lover, you're not my friend, you're not my brother. Oh, and no, there's no room here. There's a vacancy in my heart, but it ain't for fear.
Welcome, friends, to Your Other Brothers Podcast, navigating faith, homosexuality, and masculinity together. From the Jewel of the Blue Ridge, my name is Tom. I'm so glad you are here. We got an incredible episode. I have a sneaking feeling this is going to be an incredible episode. From the city of Oaks, Raleigh, North Carolina, let's go to our other brother, Ryan. What's up, Ryan?
Hello, everyone.
Ryan, it's so good to see your face right now. Thanks for coming today.
Thanks for having me.
And coming to us today from the sunny tundra, it is our other brother, Aaron, from California today. What's up, Aaron?
Hello. Yeah, everybody in the folksy tundra needs to take a break from it every so often and get somewhere sunny.
You're taking the tundra west. As far as I know, our very first Californian correspondent now on the YOBcast. Our dear friend Keegan came on the ConvoCast. I'm trying to think if anyone else has ever checked in from California. Forgive me if I'm forgetting someone, but it's nice to have you there on the other side. We are literally now coast to coast, you guys, from the Atlantic to the Pacific. Look at us. What a thing this is. Yeah, you guys, I'm really excited for this episode. Well, a couple things. I'm always excited for the YOBcast and being able to connect with people that I love. But today we're talking about something that is very intriguing to me. Aaron, you actually are the spearhead for this topic. Not that we're running low on topics, mind you, like we have so many things that we want to still talk about. But Aaron, I know since a couple months ago when you started getting more involved with the podcast, like you brought this up as a potential topic, and not only as a topic, but bringing a guest along with it to like help inform us on the topic. And that's covenant friendship. So what a thing. Do you want to like tease the audience real quick and tell us who you've invited to the Zoom call later?
Yeah, this is something that is near and dear to my heart. I took a class from a professor in college called Covenant Relationships, and he is by far the most well-informed person I know on covenant theology, and he does a great job of going over the covenant of the church and the covenant of marriage, and he actually also goes pretty deep dive into covenant friendship. And not only was a topic that he covered very important to me, but throughout my time at college, I got to know him, and he was definitely an influential mentor to me of helping me sort through my sexuality and come to terms with the idea of celibacy and how to maybe do that in a way that's actually joy-filled and not just miserable.
Celibacy, more than misery. Yeah, I'm excited to meet this guy and to hear what he has to say. We've got that conversation coming in just a little bit. But before we get there, Ryan, you and I shared a wonderful moment, a series of moments really together this past weekend by hitting the 7 C's. We hit the 7 C's together with some friends and came out of it stronger than ever.
Mm-hmm. Very stronger than ever, if a little damp.
Yes. Damp, splashed. Yeah, we went whitewater rafting. First times, right? First time for you?
First time for me.
It was so fun. We're not gonna talk too much about it, but like a couple of standout moments from that trip, Ryan, was we had this awesome guide who led us, who made us believe that we were in control when I honestly believe we were doing nothing. Like he told us to paddle, and we did, but like I feel like he was the one in the back just like completely steering us where we need to go ultimately.
I feel like we all paddled a total of like 16 times. And the rest of it was just him. Yeah.
So super empowering to be able to to put this little raft down a raging river at times. But some other moments, we jumped off a rock, like a really tall rock, like mighty men. That was fun. I had some trepidation and then a lot of water in my nose after that.
Mm-hmm.
That was fun. And then, but by far my favorite part, I know it was your favorite part, Ryan, was one of the other guides on the boat. You guys, just verbally painting this picture, I feel like is not going to do it justice, whatsoever. But there was this other guide, because there was like 7 or 8 rafts that went out with our party. And so there's this other guide, like middle-aged guy who had this like baggy flannel shirt, and sitting sitting so lackadaisically on the back of the raft with his legs crossed. This is the image I want to get across to everyone. Because you picture going down a raging river. You don't picture someone sitting on the back of the boat with their legs crossed and just like...
Yeah, he was just like casually perched on the back of this raft.
Yeah.
Legs crossed, not quite like a knee over knee, like
it's like shin over shin, like a low leg cross.
Yeah, it's difficult to describe, but yeah, he was like my spirit animal. Like I just want to be going through the raging rapids of life's turmoil and just kind of perched relaxedly on the back of my raft, just like doing a little paddle every once in a while whenever it's truly necessary.
Right. Because during the course of the couple hours on the river, like we would pass each other, so we would always be in sight of each other. But like it was just so fun. It's not like he did that for 10 seconds and then was in like super rafting mode. Like no, that was easily like 90% of the time he's just perched there. Like I was joking, all he needed was like a cup of espresso to be drinking along the way while he's like with one hand while he's like paddling and just lying there and taking complete control of his raft. It was a beautiful thing to behold. just thought I'd share that wonderful visual from our rafting weekend together. It was a blast. So much fun. Well, you guys, I don't want to, this isn't bad news. Hear me out. This is not bad news, but this is our last episode for a little while. And the reason it's our last episode for a little while, I struggle to say season finale because I just struggle to use the words seasons with podcasts. It doesn't jive with me for some reason, but whatever, call it for what it is. This is the last episode in a long string of episodes that we've done in 2021. We're going to take a little break. And the reason we're taking a little break is because we are officially having our first Yobbers retreat since May of 2019, like 2.5 years ago. It is so crazy to me that it was that long ago. But because of COVID, because of the pandemic, we just had no way to meet together for the last 1.5 years. So we're finally doing it. We're finally doing that later this summer. And as a result, just taking a little bit of a podcast break to pour into that, prepare that, and make it hopefully the best retreat we've ever done. That's always the hope, right? So we're going to take a little break for the next several weeks, and we'll be back before long with another string of episodes taking us to the end of the year. So stay tuned for that. I always like to verbalize that because I don't want people to think like, oh my gosh, 4 weeks have gone by and they haven't done a new episode. What's going on? What happened? Where did they go? So we'll be back before long. And what I've learned is that it really is helpful as someone hosting the show and editing the show. Like it is helpful for me to have like defined periods of break. If I could do 100 episodes a year, I would love to do this show every other week for the rest of my life. But is it sustainable? Can that pace be kept up with? And it's become clear that is not doable. So, and that's okay. Like I like the idea of for the foreseeable future, like a month or two break in the summer, a month or two break over the holidays, like November, December, January, and then being consistent then in all the other weeks in between. So that's the hope for those that have listened or longtime listeners, or if you're new to the show, that's the rhythm I'm hoping to lock into. And I'm grateful for guys like Ryan and Aaron and others who are helping out and pouring into these regular gatherings. Cause it means a lot to hear from people all these years later that this show that people are still discovering for the first time, that they are just finding a sense of home and a sense of camaraderie here with us. So we're so glad to have you, and we promise we'll be back. So stay tuned. No voicemails today, but if you want to leave a voicemail for us to come back to when we come back from our retreat break, that would bless me so much. So if you want to leave us a voicemail, we always love getting them. I always love hearing them. 706-389-8009. Leave us a call. And before we get into this episode, we are so thrilled with our sponsor. They jumped in from the 90s to sponsor this episode on Covenant Friendship. And of course, it is Friendship Bracelets. Thank you, Friendship Bracelets, for adding a little pizzazz. Always there for us, always dangling on our wrists for weeks, maybe months, and then we get tired of them and put them away. but they exist. They still exist. Just if they're not on your wrist, they're still a friendship bracelet. When does a friendship bracelet cease to be a friendship bracelet?
When the friendship ends, which is never.
which is what we're talking about today. Friendship that never ends. Friendship bracelets. Thank you for wrapping yourself around this episode. All right. Well, why don't we dive into our main topic today? And Aaron, I feel like you would be the person to intro our guest today, since you know who he is. So why don't you take it away, Aaron?
Absolutely. Yeah. So today we've got Dr. Paul Eddy, who's going to discuss covenant friendship with us. Paul is a professor of biblical theological studies at Bethel University. He's got his PhD from Marquette. He's authored a bunch of books. Recently authored one that some of you may have seen called Understanding Transgender Identities. It's a Ford Views book that he does a great job of putting together with another professor of mine. And I met Paul when I was in college. He taught at my university, and I took a class from him that was covenant relationships. Covenant friendship is just one of those relationships that he talks about. But Paul, I think, is a great person to come in and kick off this sort of conversation for us. I don't know anybody who knows covenant relationships better than he does, or covenant friendship. He was interacting with texts like Spiritual Friendship by Wesley Hill when nobody else in the Christian world was. And he's been a mentor and a good brother to me. He's probably loved me and seen and heard me about as well as anybody has in the church, particularly as an SSA person who I am. It's helpful having, our straight brothers coming alongside us and paying attention when nobody else is. So with that, I'll let Paul just kind of introduce himself any more that he wants to, and then kick into maybe just a little intro on covenant relationships and covenant friendship.
Hey, thank you, Aaron. And let me just say, this is not a perfunctory statement. It's an honor for me to be here with you folks. So I think Aaron did a good introduction. The only other things I'd say about myself, I'm also a part-time teaching pastor at Woodland Hills Church in St. Paul. And actually right now, relocated for a few weeks down south. We live in Minnesota, of course, but we're down in Florida for my wife's health. So I have my wife, Kelly, and my two sons, Jordan and Justin. We're both Bethel students, and that's my family. So, but yeah, again, it's really an honor to be with you guys. You asked about covenant relationship, covenant friendship. I learned about the idea when I was 26 years of age, and I've been literally gripped by it ever since. The first day I heard of it was a sermon, and that sermon fundamentally changed my sense of my relationship with God. And I've been really on a quest ever since. That was summer of '85. So I've been on a quest ever since to understand covenant in its depths ever since. My basic working definition of covenant, and by covenant, I don't mean everything that the Bible happens to use the word covenant for in scriptures, because it's rather really a very flexible term, berit in the Hebrew, or diatheke in the New Testament. But what I see God's heart being centered on in covenant is a relationship that produces family out of people who are not family. And so to me, that's the power of covenant. It takes the non-familied or the unfamilied and literally brings out of nothing, or at least not out of non-family, it brings family. And it does that through promise, simply through the promise of the spoken word. And so what I see covenant doing is very much what I see God doing in Genesis chapter 1, bringing something out of nothing. In this particular case, bringing family relationships out of non-family people simply by the vow of covenant love. And that to me, that's a miracle. I only see two ways of being family: blood and covenant. And covenant is that which can cross ethnic barriers and racial barriers and socioeconomic barriers and bring family in non-family situations. So that's to me what covenant is broadly. And when we say covenant friendship, I think now we're just particularizing this power of covenant to the relationship of friendship, which, if we're honest with ourselves, has been a relationship in the modern world that's been largely demoted to accidental relationships, to casual relationships. And we've lost a lot of the power of friendship of the ancient world. I think covenant friendship can recapture that for us.
Yeah, that's awesome. I was kind of, as we went into this, I went, I wonder how he's going to be able to condense down an entire semester's worth of material.
How did I do, Aaron?
You did a great job, and you're so succinct. So I was
telling Ryan, this is so fun because I loved school. I was an A. Not to brag, I was an A student and I just loved learning, but I haven't been in school in like however many years, 11, 12 years now. And so I was like, man, it's so exciting. I feel like I get to go to school for like 20, 30 minutes, just the condensed version. But yeah, no, that was beautiful. Thanks for laying that out.
Yeah, I've been taking notes.
I see you. Yeah, I see you taking notes over there.
There you go. I love that. Yeah, that's awesome. And I think for this community, chosen family is a really important topic of discussion because we do sort of feel that loss for those of us who are trying to remain celibate, feeling like we're missing out on the family component that many people in the church and in the culture get through through relationships or through marriage or other things like that. But you actually had the chance to perform a covenant friendship ceremony. And I think you've only done one. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Maybe you could just talk a little bit about that and that experience and how those people found each other and ended up choosing each other as family.
Yeah. So for years, I think I started in Bethel in 95. In my very first class, they said, what do you want to teach? And I said, covenant, and they let me do it. So I've been teaching this covenant class since 1995. And I always mention covenant friendship as a category that we've lost in our culture. And I've had over the years, a student here, a student there, who will come up to me after class and say, hey, I'm kind of intrigued with this covenant friendship idea. I got a best friend. They're like a sibling, but I'd like them to be a sibling. And I've had some conversations where we've talked about what that might look like, but it wasn't until, this would have been summer of 2012, that I had some students who had been in my classes several years earlier and were currently in seminary. There was a group of women. And I think 4 of them had been in my class at one point, and there was 9 of them now, all in seminary together, who were beginning to feel like God was calling them to something more than just friendship. But they really didn't know what that was. And then one of them remembered, hey, we had this Dr. Eddy guy who talked about covenant friendship. Maybe we should talk to him. So we spent much of the summer of 2012 meeting to talk about what was covenant, how does this intersect with friendship? And really the important question, might God be calling them to something like covenant friendship? And as they leaned into that discernment process, they came to the conclusion, after about 6 months of processing this, that yes, that they were being called to covenant. And now here's where this gets a little bit, not tricky, but I think we have to keep this in mind, particularly as Christians. We have to remember that we are already covenant siblings. When you say yes to Jesus and I say yes to Jesus, we don't need a second covenant to make us siblings. Our covenants with Jesus instantly put us into siblinghood covenant with every member of the family of Christ on the planet. And so I want us to be careful not to think that we have to add a covenant to be siblings. We already are. What the challenge, I think, is it's really hard to be family to 1 billion people, or whatever the size of the church is today on the planet. The problem is when your family gets too big, you start to get the sense that this isn't really family, because no one can manage a family of 1 billion people. I mean, let's be honest. At Woodland Hills, we have, I don't know, around 1,000 folks who I think call our church their home in the Twin Cities. And that's too large of a family to be family on any meaningful basis. And so I've used the idea of biological family in terms of, say, extended family, and then in terms of nuclear family, to have us think about how we actually do family biologically. I have an extended Eddy family that's probably got 50, 60, 70 people in the Twin Cities, but I don't see them that much. It's my nuclear family that I live with and actually do family with. I think in the body of Christ, we have to ask the same question. We have 1 billion brothers and sisters, but who, to colloquialize this, who do I go home to? I can't just go home to any Eddy family and say, hey, I'm home, because God's called me to a particular family to be doing 24/7 family with. I think in the church, we have not asked that question. I think what we've done is we have turned the nuclear family, the biological nuclear family, into an idol in this culture. I think it's been happening for the last 200 years in the West, ever since the Romantic period hit Europe. And I think the church has fallen right into that trap without critically analyzing what we've done to biological family through the lens of the kingdom. And instead, we've bought into the idolization of marriage, sex, and romance, and we think that that's Christian, when I don't think that's Christian at all. I think we've left out of that paradigm every unmarried person is now having to live something like a second-class Christian existence. And if we instead placed kingdom family at the center of our paradigm of family, I think we could recover not only covenant friendship as a really important category, but we could put marriage back in its place where it's not an idol to threaten the kingdom, but rather one potential calling that some of us in the kingdom have, while others have other callings, maybe to covenant friendship, maybe to a number of realms of covenant, but all of us to covenant siblinghood as brothers and sisters in Jesus. I think that should be the primary category, not marriage, and then, we'll figure out what to do with single people in our church because, well, you got to do something. That's probably an overly long answer, but I've got a passion about this that the church needs to wake up to that hasn't for a long, long time.
Yeah. Well, I had a quick jump in question about that, because I can see your passion, and I loved hearing that. I'm sure there's amens happening around the listenership, around the universe as they listen to this. But my question is, I guess, for other straight people, for other pastors, for other people in the church, do you encounter a similar fervor or spirit, or is it just easier to be like, you know what, if people just got married, if they just had families, that would make everyone's lives easier. So let's just get the singles to get married. Do you see that in other contacts that you have, other ministry leaders, just sharing that same spirit about this issue?
That's fun. It's a great question, Tom. Honestly, my general experience is no, I don't. I don't sense that most Christian leaders that I'm aware of have even raised this question. But here's the thing. Because I do have a passion for this tends to come out of my mouth in a lot of different contexts. And I'll have to say that usually when it does, I find that it resonates with people. I find that it resonates with other pastors. It's just that it's never been a question that's been posed to them before. And what this tells me is, and this shouldn't surprise us, the church for 2,000 years, I think, it finds itself enculturated in the culture it happens to find itself in. It's sort of a tautology, but that's just what happens to us. And I think the church loves this idea of being countercultural. But to be countercultural means we have to be critically thinking about the culture that the church has become. And that requires us to have other voices that see other perspectives being part of the conversation. And honestly, I think we have not allowed, and I hate this word, Aaron knows I hate this word, I just haven't been able to find a better word yet, but single people, and I put that in scare quotes because I don't think single people are single people. I think they're as familied as anybody else in the body of Christ. And so in my head, whenever I say that word, I say to myself, family. Because what we all are is family. And I don't think we should index ourselves by whether we're married or not. That seems a very arbitrary division to me that separates us. It's just that it's a word so unmarried people in the church, I don't think have been given a voice for a long time to be part of the conversation that sets the table of the categories that we use with each other. And whenever I have this conversation with unmarried people, it takes about 3 seconds for me to hear amen. It's just that I'm thinking, gosh, why did it take me so long to think about this? And I don't think I would have thought about this if I hadn't studied covenant and saw other ways of being family than simply marriage and nuclear family. I think covenants would open my eyes to it, but there's, I'm not sure the language you folks would prefer. I tend to say the side B, if that's okay. But I'll be honest, I think that the side B community, as I understand it, is one of the most prophetic voices the church has today on this topic. And I think the side B community offers the wider church a gift that we have not had in a long, long time. And that if we recognize that voice as a gift, could help the entire church rethink these very categories. So I think this is an absolutely essential conversation, and that organizations like yours, Christian context to bring together folks with the vocational orientation, I think, that's the language I would use, is just absolutely essential to the wider church. And I am doing everything I can to help other people recognize that.
Mm. Thanks for your supportive words. Yeah, it's all Ryan. Ryan speaks on behalf of all side B people for creating this prophetic voice. No, I hope the side B community, I hope you're onto something. I hope that it leads, it can be a tough road, it's like life isn't easy, but like, I think I'd like to think that both Yob and the greater side B world has something really pivotal to offer the church. And it's still kind of early in this whole movement or whatever you want to call it. So I'm curious to see in the decades to come where Yob goes, organizations like Revoice, other side B communities and ministries. Yes. Like, I think, I really do believe there's a pivotal role to play there.
I will say, and maybe this happened to me this week. A friend of mine who loves the Lord and who's a good brother, sent me a blog piece that he was like, he knows I'm doing sexuality research, and he thought it would be helpful to me, and it was helpful, but in an ironic way. But it was a piece arguing that side B people, the side B movement is like this heresy that's entered the church. I had no idea this was even a perspective. Like I assumed every time someone would hear what the side B community is attempting to do, it'd be like jump on board, and it's like apparently not. So I realize now, at least as someone who wants to see myself as a committed friend of side B folks, I realize there's another side to this I need to become aware of and become an apologist, a defender of. So it seems to me side B folks are getting really hit from both sides. People on the conservative side, you're too liberal, and people on the liberal side, you're way too conservative. It's like, I don't know how that's happened, but sign me up for wherever the allies group is for side B people, because that's where I want to be, and I want everyone else to join me there. So just know you're not alone in this this really strange position of being kind of like when I think I'm an Anabaptist, so I think of Jesus being primarily a third way person. Whenever there's a cultural binary debate, Jesus finds a way of showing both sides they're wrong, and there's a whole new question that needs to be asked to understand the truth here. And I feel like side B folks are in that third way position, which is always difficult, but very Jesus-like. It's the place where Jesus lived, is a third way dynamic. And I think side B is precisely that.
Yeah, I appreciate that so much. I have sort of a big picture, abstract, maybe even foundational question. And then if we're ready, I'd love to ask another question to sort of zoom into this idea of covenant friendships. So the big picture question is, as I'm listening to you, I'm noticing that you use covenant as like, and sorry to everyone I'm going to get grammatical here, but as an uncountable noun versus I'm used to talking about covenants as a countable noun. And so that's like my first little like flag to maybe I understand this concept very differently from you, kind of from a very fundamental point of view. So I was just wondering if you could speak a little bit about, how covenant is different from the idea of individual covenants. Let's hear about that.
Sure. Yeah. That's an interesting question. I've never had anyone ask me that. So I certainly believe in a covenant, both in the singular and the plural. When I use it in the singular, what I'm signaling there is this larger biblical category I see, again, that I define as God's designed mechanism by which to create family relationships out of non-family people. So to me, that's the broader category. So when I say covenant, I'm signaling that dynamic. Within that dynamic or category, I see multiple both types of covenants. So for example, what I would consider to be the 6 major covenants of the Bible between God and human beings. So creational covenant, Abrahamic, Noahic, Sinai covenant, Davidic covenant, and the new covenant. So those I would all call God-human covenants. But then also human-to-human covenants, marriage, friendship, adoption, obviously the siblinghood in Jesus Christ, just to name some of the ones that we could talk about. Those I would all call covenants, plural. They would be actual instantiations of the conceptual category of non-family becoming family. So does that help clarify it?
Yeah, I think so. I think, it's kind of like water versus waters. Like there's the substance of water, yes, and then there's like Michigan.
Yeah.
And so there's like the substance, sort of the metaphysical substance of covenant, yes, and then there's like marriage.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I think that's a good analogy.
Cool. So talking about like covenant friendships, one of my questions is like, do covenants, I guess the way I've thought about covenants in the past is that they kind of have these terms, almost like a contract has terms. Is that also like the way you think about covenants? And like, if so, what are the terms of a covenant friendship? Is that kind of like, is there like a well-accepted script for that? Or is it sort of free form and you sort of figure it out on your own? And if so, like, how do we figure that out? How do people decide what the terms of that covenant friendship should be?
Oh, great questions. And I realized when I gave my definition of covenant, I didn't do it at all through the lens of, say, a covenant ceremony, which of course is the inaugural moment. It's the formation of the covenant. And in the class we spend quite a bit of time, as Aaron knows, going through the elements of a covenant. I, just for pedagogical purposes, usually boil them down to 11 common elements of ancient covenants. Don't have to go through all those now, but I would say, I've kind of thought a lot about this. What would be the minimal number of elements necessary to a covenant, to the creation of a particular covenant? And in my mind, I've sort of boiled it down to 4. I think there must be terms. I think there must be promises or vows to those terms. I think there must be a sign of the covenant, and I think there must be witnesses. So I think those four elements, to me, obviously, if you're Adam and Eve and there are no other human witnesses, then there's no witnesses. But short of being on a deserted island or something, I think witnesses and then terms, vows, and signs are to me essential to the formation of covenant relationships. So applying that now to the question of a covenant friendship, obviously the vow, I do, or I will, or I'm in, or some sort of verbal affirmation is pretty straightforward. So would I think witnesses be. Talking about this group of 9 women that I led in the ceremony. When we designed the ceremony, these obviously were some of the very questions we had to talk through. They each invited 1 or 2 witnesses, and there was 9 of them. So there was about 25 people there, I think, who witnessed this along with us. For their vows, their terms that they vowed to, they spent quite a bit of time, as they tell me, discerning in prayer and then conversation together. What was it they were promising to? What were these terms? And I don't remember them off the top of my head, but they were very clear that what God was calling them to, or what I would say the purpose of their covenant friendship, wasn't just to hang out and be good friends. Their purpose was that they were 9 women in seminary that all had a sense of calling to ministry, but that being a woman in ministry is a difficult road. And so what they felt God was calling them to was to a communal covenant friendship to support and walk with each other till death do them part, their vocational callings as women in ministry. So it was very much an intentional kingdom purpose to the covenant, not just we like each other, let's hang out. And I wouldn't have said this before I met them, but having walked with them through this covenant and now the years hence, I've come to be convinced that it probably is wise to have a very distinct vocational purpose to a friendship covenant, not just to covenant because, hey, this is my best friend and we sort of want to be like siblings. And I'll tell you part of why. I'm absolutely convinced now that as soon as anyone covenants with anybody, they've just invited God into their relationship in a uniquely powerful way, and at the same time have invited a spiritual target on their back, both personally and relationally, for an enemy that I believe is a very personal, tangible agent to destroy their relationship. And so I think at one and the same time, covenant is a gift from God and a target for Satan and the forces of evil to try to destroy. And for that very reason, I think one should discern a calling to a covenant that's worth fighting for, because you will in fact have to fight for that covenant.
Where does exclusivity in a covenant come from? What makes the marriage covenant exclusive? And I guess the church covenant, my covenant with the church should be exclusive as well, but maybe a friendship covenant doesn't need to be exclusive.
I think, so I'll answer the question from the perspective of not how it is happening in the world, but how I think it should happen if the church was doing things right. Because sadly, I think what is happening, if we're being very honest with ourselves, is in terms of covenants in the church today, marriage gets the priority and everything else sort of follows after that and is in service to that. Even to the point, let's be honest, of whether I continue to attend this church or not. If it's not, feeding my kids and keeping them, Christian and helping my marriage, well, then I go find a new church. I think this needs to be fundamentally turned on its head. I think our particular calling as sisters and brothers to a particular local church, which should function then analogously to my nuclear family, but it's my nuclear spiritual family, not my nuclear biological family. that should be something we discern. And once we sense yes to that should have the binding power of a nuclear family as much as biology does. And if we could think that way, then the question becomes, within our local church, that we are now bound as committed brothers and sisters to be the people of God in this time and place for this mission. Now we have to ask ourselves other questions. Are any of us called to additional covenants? Some will be called to marriage. Some will not. Some will be called to particularize their friendships in a vocational way beyond simply brother and sister relationships. And I think it'd be wonderful if the church could acknowledge that and could actually celebrate covenant friendships as they do marriages, which would mean then would have to also have not just marriage therapists for when marriages have difficulties, but friendship therapists, which notice no one ever does that. We would dignify friendship as important, as intangible, and therefore as when it's in trouble, we're saving as much as any marriage. The church could do all of this. It could be this countercultural because it gets the purpose that all of these relationships the purpose is to image the triune God in agape love within each of these. And so once you realize that's the purpose of every relationship, whether it's the church or the marriage or the friendship, then you realize every one of them are worth saving. Because when we don't save relationships, we put on display broken Trinity. And it's an oxymoron. The Trinity is not broken. It's Jesus called his final prayer in John 17, Father, let them be one as we are one, so the world will know you sent me. Oh my goodness. Like, that's just Jesus's mission plan. We should be the experts on planet Earth of salvaging relationships. To not do that is to not fulfill Jesus's mission. And so for all those reasons, I think both being experts on covenant and being experts on reconciliation should just be second nature to the church. How that fits with partnered celibacy relationships, I think, is a really fascinating question. And I guess, honestly, I think I know a little bit about how partnered celibacy is being conceived of today, but not certain enough to know where it would stop and start with regard to a covenant friendship. I guess I'd have to ask you, are partnered celibate relationships, do they have terms and vows that people say yes to? If they do, I would say, well, then it is already a covenant. And now we just have to specify what type of covenant is it. That's kind of off the top of my head how I think about that.
Yeah, I think you answered some of the important questions. I mean, I think some of the important questions you answered were, well, is this something just anybody should do, or does this require some sort of vocation or extra calling? And I think maybe it's true that any covenant requires some amount of calling, right? And people are just entering into marriages without necessarily feeling that vocation or calling. But I guess one other question I've got is, should all these covenants be able to coexist? So I know the topic of the podcast today is not partnered celibate relationships or anything. I think in some senses, a covenant friendship might look very similar to a partnered celibate relationship. In other cases, it may not. And I guess my question is, would you think that a covenant friendship is going to coexist alongside the covenant of marriage, or, obviously the covenant with the church, or are these in some way exclusive? And if they became exclusive for some reason, is that a red flag to you?
I think I'll tell you where I stand on this question, though I'm open to being challenged, because this is something I've only more recently begun to think about through the experience of the Daughters 1-9, this friendship circle of women I've walked with. I think what I want to say to your question is that by its very nature, covenant is always exclusive. And I think why we have to say this is because if covenant takes non-family and produces family, it doesn't do that for everybody. I mean, not everyone's in the covenant. God's heart is for everyone to be, for example, in his covenant, the new covenant, but not everyone's in it. So I think there's a sense in which covenant is always, by definition, exclusive. The question now becomes, how exclusive, and exclusivity for what purpose? I happen to believe that Jesus in Matthew 19, that if we read his teaching there on sexuality, I think Jesus is implicitly arguing for monogamy. So I think we can anchor that in Jesus' teachings, and he, of course, appeals back to Genesis 2 for that. In friendship, it's a bit different because, as this group of women showed, there's 9 friends. But when they come to my class, every year they get asked the question, how do your other friends feel about your friendships, you being in this covenant? And they always talk about the fact that it's a bit of an awkward situation, that not every friend can join this covenant. It's the 9 and no more. But they have other friendships, and they've had to negotiate, how do you not have other people feel jealous, even though they're not in this covenant? And I'll just end by saying, these 9 women have agreed that their exclusivity is for here's their language they've developed, exclusivity for the purpose of greater inclusivity. And what they mean by that is their covenant friendships help them be better at their other relationships so that they can actually have more capacity to be in healthy relationships in other areas of their life. So I think if we think of it that way, exclusivity for the purpose of greater kingdom inclusivity, it can be always in the service of others.
Yeah. Paul, that's awesome. I think I'm ready to get on a flight to Minneapolis and just like attend a class. I think you've sold me. I'm ready.
Hey, love to have you. Open invitation.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. It would be awesome if you're open to coming back sometime. I feel like I would love to pick your brain on some more things. I feel like you have a lot to say, and I'm just so encouraged. I hope our listeners are too, with just like, I know a lot of people in our listenership come from all kind of vantage points with the church and feeling all kinds of some wounds, some distance, some just hard times connecting. So it's like really meaningful. It's meaningful to me to have someone with as much passion as you do to see people connected and not left behind. So thanks for coming on. It was awesome to talk to you about this.
Seriously, it was an honor. I would love to any time you'd want to have a follow-up. And, just in response to your comment about your audience in the church, honestly, a big part of me, since some will be listening to this, is for me to say on behalf of the church to apologize. Just a huge apology for so many things of the way that the church has generally treated SSA people and not been the family that we should have been. And I just hope that there is a season we are in now where this is starting to turn. And I just want to be part of that.
Well, it's much appreciated. Thank you so much. Yeah. Awesome to meet you, Paul.
Absolutely.
And hopefully it's not the last time.
All right. God bless you guys.
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks, Paul.
All right. Much love, brother.
Bye-bye. See you, Aaron.
Bye.
Paul Eddy, everybody. Wow, Aaron, where'd you find that guy? He's great.
He's something, I tell you. And
where'd you find him? That's awesome. Thank you for sharing him with us.
Oh yeah.
Even if that wasn't recorded, that would have just been a delight for my soul today.
Right.
So thank you. The fact that hopefully a few hundred people listening can be blessed by it. That's awesome too.
I'm going to need an hour to review my notes and come up with stuff to say.
We'll reconvene. Yeah. We'll reconvene in 60 minutes and have a breakout session. Yeah. No. Yeah. I saw Ryan huddled over taking some notes. I took some notes on my phone as he was speaking. And so we've got a little bit of time. I kind of intentionally did it this way. Sometimes we have guests for the whole episode, and sometimes we have them for part of the episode. And I thought it'd be really special to have kind of an in-house little conversation with the three of us now to talk about what Paul shared. And we certainly could have we easily could have talked to him for another hour, 2 hours. So part of me wants to have a sequel to keep picking his brain on some things. But I thought it would be cool to talk to you guys about this subject. And I guess, Aaron, let's go straight back to you, because you actually took the full length course. Like, tell our listeners, like how long was the course? How often did you meet? Like how did this podcast recording compare with like actually going through a course over X number of days?
Yeah, obviously it just barely scratches the surface. He's one of those people where he would write a lot more books, except he is too busy always researching more. Like he just needs to know more about the subject, more about the topic. And it's us, it's his colleagues, it's people kind of going, okay, Paul, you got to get some of those nuggets of wisdom out onto a page, even if maybe in 10 years you think differently. Yeah, but I mean, I've reached out to him and asked him for resources on some of these topics, and I'll get hundreds of pages of Word docs that are all just non-annotated links to sources. And so he knows his stuff. Now, the course lasted a semester. I ended up auditing it twice, once while I was in college and once after leaving college. I went back and did it again. And that just goes to show how much there is to try to soak in, and how going through it twice, I still feel like I could sit through it again and again and try to soak up more. For me, one of the things that really worked well is he goes into covenant theology a little bit, and he spends the first chunk of the class talking a fair bit about our covenant with God. And that really impacted how I understand my faith and my relationship with God, seeing it as a covenant relationship, understanding as part of that, he goes through the different components of covenant. What really make a covenant versus a contract is something that he goes quite a bit into. And then he goes through, so he kind of does covenant with church and God is one chunk of the class. And then covenant marriage is another chunk. And then covenant friendship is kind of the third portion. So, he normally spends multiple weeks just on covenant friendship, let alone everything else. And obviously, when you've talked about the other covenants, there's a lot of comparing, contrasting, and, piecing out how do these things work together apart. So it's great. I wish we had time to just do an entire podcast series of him just teaching his class online for us. But I think what he shared today was a very good introduction to the conversation. And that's what I would consider this podcast today, is just the beginning of a conversation about covenant friendship and covenant really in general, rather than people going, great, Yob has now fleshed out completely what covenant friendship is, and we're ready to go do with it as we will. So yeah.
I feel like it's rare that we do a podcast topic or write a blog or what have you and cover everything, and we've solved it, and now we're ready to move on to the next thing. Like, as always, this is a conversation starter. This is the hopefully first dive into something like this. And we hinted a little bit during the episode, or during the I always feel awkward calling it an interview. I don't want to be an interviewer. I just want to be a fellow human, but whatever that was, whatever we just had with him, hinting at partnered celibacy as well. Like, that's another topic that I feel like is definitely something worth diving into on a deeper basis. I know members of our community have reached out to me about that. And so this is like, again, we're getting our feet wet. We're getting conversations started. And I'm excited to kind of see both where this conversation goes today in this podcast, but then, and podcasts to come, community events to come, blog posts, Discord posts to come. Like, I just hope that a conversation like that can lead to deeper dives. Cause I don't know. I'm just really encouraged by that guy whenever I see straight people in general, but especially people with reach, with an audience, authors, pastors, professors, what have you, like that's super encouraging to me.
Tom, you make it sound like we're like wrapping up the episode, but we're really just getting started.
We are just getting started. Yeah.
So how about it? Covenant friendships? Are we doing this?
Are we on board? Okay. Well, let's start there, because I admittedly, this was an episode, I told Aaron this, like, it was so fun to just be able to hand him the reins. Cause like, this is not a topic I'm familiar with, like, really at all. I read about it in scripture and I see certain relationships. So I have like a base knowledge, like 2,000, 3,000 years removed. But I don't have any kind of interaction with this in the present day. And so it was fun to like let Aaron plan this out a little bit and talk and let him lay it out. So the way Paul laid it out, terms, promises, signs, and witnesses, that's like the essence of covenant. And I'd be curious to hear what y'all's thoughts are on all of those, because, well, I have anxieties about this, but I'll get to that later. So maybe let's go to Aaron, because you took this course. Like, where are you at with the notion of covenant friendship? Does it intrigue you? Does it daunt you? Does it What does it do? What does it strike up in you?
I think over the years, it's done a lot of different things to me. I think especially when I was early on in processing through my sexuality, coming to terms with the idea of being celibate, this gave me hope of family. And sometimes that was healthy, and other times it was very much me looking for a way to have something as close to a spouse as I could, minus maybe the sex. We didn't get into it today, but Paul would talk about how sex is a sign of the marriage covenant. And so that would be one reason why sex is so exclusive to marriage. But I think where, obviously with partnered celibacy, there's a very different spectrum of what people think of when they think of that and what they understand it as. And there have been times when I've seen this as, a way to get the family I want, particularly when I am attracted to a guy and I want to be close to them and I want to be exclusive and I want all these things. And I think that's not as healthy. But over the years, and as I've kind of grown through this, I've seen this as something that could be vocationally very helpful for some people in the SSA world, as a way to have family that, is on the same journey as you and maybe is trying to do the same things, ministering in the same way. But never do I think this should be used as a replacement for marriage. And something he didn't mention really explicitly is many of those women in that Daughters 1-9 covenant friendship are married. Some are not, some
plot
are.
Twist.
Yeah. So when he's talking about exclusivity of covenants, he's not necessarily saying that you can't be in a friendship covenant and a marriage covenant, but rather that I think maybe if you're in a friendship covenant, that kind of to some extent has exclusivity with other relationships and other friendships and vice versa, with other marriage covenants and things.
But he described adoption as a covenant, which I thought was really interesting and I hadn't thought of before. You can adopt multiple kids. So
right.
I'm still a little, I have more questions about the exclusivity angle.
Yeah, here's that was because I took 3 or 4 notes down, and exclusivity, let's go there, because that's my biggest anxiety with it. Like when he's talking about friends choosing one another, it all sounds great. There's a lot of it that I actually really deeply resonate with, the idea of choosing people, not just one person. I would be more inclined to choose that. What are they called? Daughters 1-9. So epic. I would want an epic name too. That's so great. But anyway, all that's great and all. I would love to have multiple people to lean on instead of just one person. That's just how I'm wired. But there's this thing in me, and I feel it with Yob, and I feel it with just in general. I have this thing in me that I get anxious when I know that somebody's left out, or when I feel like they're not as in as other people are. Maybe not left out totally in the cold, but if they're not as close with somebody and they want to get in. And so the thing that starts messing with me when I start thinking about this is what if you had 5 people, just to pick a round number, if you had 5 people who were all good friends with one another, they liked each other, they hung out with each other, more than just liking each other. That was the other thing I wrote down, was having a purpose. What is this? More than just we all like each other and don't want to die alone. There's got to be something more to it than that, I think. But what if there's a 6th person who's close with 3 of those people, but not the other person? And then it's do you have one massive covenant with everyone, or do you have multiple covenants going with these 3 people and then with these 4 people? That's where it gets a little hairy for me. And the exclusivity thing hurts me because I'm inevitably just always looking at who's 80% of the way to where I am 100% with this person. And it just, I don't know, it just makes me heavy with emotion, and I start collapsing like a dying star. So I don't know what to do with that.
Wow. Sad. Well, that's a great question, actually. And so with the Daughters 1-9, not all of those women really were very close to each other, or even knew each other when the conversation started. It was kind of a conglomeration of different groups. And I'm basing this off of memory, so I may not be recalling everything perfectly. But I think the biggest thing is a shared sense of vocation and calling, and a lot of discernment of letting God guide who is or is not inside that covenant. And the exclusivity really coming into play once the covenant's formed, and not so much maybe in the formation of the covenant. So, you might have a 6-person pre-covenant who, for some reason or another, somebody really wants in there, or you feel vocationally called to them. And I don't think like that's the stage where you have to be worried about being exclusive based on how well you know people or not. And they live all over the world. They live all over the country. So
yeah, so it's not like they're all living together. That was something we didn't get to.
Yeah.
Because I knew a little bit. I remember you sharing about this group, Aaron, a couple of years ago or something. But yeah, they don't live together, so it's not like a monastery or a whatever you would call it.
Right.
A monastery.
Yeah.
A nunnery.
Yeah.
Do nuns live in a nunnery? Is that what that's called?
I think so. Yeah.
Convent.
I think nunnery.
I think a nunnery is a word. I don't know.
Get
I'm
thee to
sorry.
a nunnery, but I don't. I think that's
Look at convent.
maybe a little
Just go with
archaic.
That could be.
The nun factory. Yeah, that's where they all live.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, no, that's I'm glad we clarified that they don't live all together. Some are married, yeah. So there's layers to it. It's not just like, yeah, I don't know what people's vision of what was described was earlier, but yeah.
So there's the kind of the dimension. I've been thinking about all the dimensions we can use to identify a covenant. Kind of like there's, a point in three-dimensional space, X, Y, and Z. There's these three dimensions we can use to sort of address the point, like find where the point is. And so for covenant, there's like, I was trying to think of what are all the different dimensions of a covenant? Like what are the independent ways covenants can differ from each other? And so like, there's the number of people in a covenant. There's, a marriage covenant has 2 people. Daughters 1-9 has 9 people. So you can say like, there's part of the definition, what makes one covenant like different from another is how many people there are in it. There's this question of exclusivity. Like marriage covenants are highly exclusive. And then maybe there's sort of a spectrum where we look at like Nashville Family of Brothers, and they're open to new people coming in and making and covenanting into that community. And so there's I'm already confusing like 2 different dimensions here. I was going to bring it. There's the exclusivity dimension, and then there's like openness to new people dimension, where like Nashville Family of Brothers could be very exclusive. They could be like, okay, you're ride or die with us and nobody else. But they're also, I don't know if that's true or not, but they're also open to new people to join that covenant. And so those are like kind of 2 different questions. There's the exclusivity of once you're in, what are the expectations? But then like, are we open to new people? Your marriage is not open to new people, but like something else could be open to new people. So I don't know. It's just so interesting to think of like, just, I don't know if you'd call it systematically, but what are all the like kind of formal ways that we can identify a covenant and describe it?
Yeah, for any who aren't familiar with what Ryan just rattled off, Nashville Family Brothers, led by Peter Vauck. We had him on the episode, or on the show rather, episode 71, Intentional Community. So if you want to listen to that episode, go scroll back down memory lane with Peter Vauck. And yeah, they are open to new people joining along the way. So that's interesting that there's different ways you could go about it. So again, there's this thing in me that likes the idea, I'm a 4. I like the idea of blazing a new trail, doing something different, doing something that no one else is doing. And in many ways, that's what's hugely appealing to me about this side B world, about all these communities popping up and being a part of something. And it was like really, I almost started crying inside when he's talking about how like the side B community is a prophetic voice for the church. Like I've been hoping that myself, but I'm like, I hope that's true. I hope straight people can see some value in what we're doing. And so to hear him just have such glowing words for Yob and for the side B community, like that was huge for me. So all that to say, I like the idea of blazing a new trail and doing something no one else is doing. I'm not going to let that stop me. Like just because no one else has done it, who cares? Like, why should that stop? If we believe in something, if we feel like the Lord is calling us or inviting us into something, especially to lead other people, like that's a huge impetus for me actually. But I guess, yeah, I have so many questions and so many just emotional, relational anxieties about it that I struggle with it. I don't want to run away from it, but I want to lean into those questions, I guess, as I continue to process what Paul was telling us earlier.
I think one of my fears is what I mentioned earlier, that when I was first tackling this issue and thinking through all this, like I wanted very much to base my dream of covenant off of romantic attraction or sexual attraction, or like finding the guy that I wish I could marry, but I can't, and having a covenant with him. And that's my worry, is that other people might try to do the same thing. I don't think that's necessarily, I think that is not what this is trying to get at, or what friendship covenant is supposed to be. And I've seen some partnered celibate relationships